Well, good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar. This webinar is further commitment from AFI in promoting good practice in health and safety, and is only one of a number of webinars we've put together for our customers and the industry. Today I'm going to focus on an ever-increasing requirement, and that is for engine emissions in London. As I said earlier, this is predominantly London, but be under no illusion, the same is now happening in other cities around the UK, such as Birmingham, Manchester, and my hometown Leeds. Even travelling home the other night, I could see the billboards on there. Clean air is a myth. Dirty air is polluting our cities, etc. So just bear with me. This webinar is recorded live. Sometimes we do have gremlins that jump about, so hopefully it's going to work okay. So just a little bit. Just move on slides on. Just a little bit on myself. As you can see there, I'm involved in various things within powered access industry and plant. Basically strategic foreign plant safety groups, which is a CPA and IPAF sort of organisation that look at various issues, of which this very subject's come up in the past. I'm then going to look at some of the other things, and just to kind of really sort of let you know something that's coming, the code of practice for the safe use of MEWPs. I was a committee member with BSI on this, and I had been for some sort of 18 months. That's due to come out probably next month is what our thoughts are. So stay tuned for that. My intention is probably early next year, once people have had a bit of a chance to look at it, is to then do a further webinar on this. As you can see, I'm a member of various organisations. No point listing them all, but equally I'm also a member of various sort of committees, of which were very important to ensure standards are met. So we're just going to look a little bit about what today is, and as I said earlier, this is this is predominantly for London. However, this has been around now, this engine emission issue, for a number of years, and now we do see it's causing some issues for clients and rental companies around the UK. I think somewhat the powered access industry has been caught napping a little bit, in my view. I know others have been a little bit more proactive in trying to make sure that standards are right, and and what's in what engines are in there, etc. But might be worthwhile listening to what we're doing today. So just looking at the agenda, we're going to cover NRMM. We're going to look at the scale of the problem, look at some classifications of engines and how you can sort of understand these things. A little bit about breathing, a bit of toxicity, looking at how they affect the body, etc. A little bit of history, look back at where these things have, why these things have happened, how it's come to where we are now. Look at actually NRMM and their website, what now and in the future, and how obviously more importantly how we're going to read an engine plate, because you are if you are on site in London, or certainly in some of the central activity zones or Canary Wharf, you are going to have inspectors looking at your engine plates, and of course there are some machines that we can get an exemption on, so just be mindful of them sort of things too. So air pollution is one of the most significant challenges facing the City of London. As a major city, London is now in breach of European legal limits for nitrogen dioxide, and many areas are now exceeding safe limits for particular matter. These limits are set by the World Health Organization. I'll explain NOx and particulate matter later on. So in order to address this, the Mayor of London and the previous Mayor, so that was Boris Johnson, now Sadiq Khan, has introduced new measures to tackle and reduce emissions from road transport, particularly diesel vehicles, including an expansion of the ultra-low emission zone. Even you might have heard in the news yesterday and on the national news last night that the Mayor has now introduced new requirements for vehicles entering the centre of London. This comes with an additional charge now imposed on the higher polluting vehicles. So it's clearly going to affect older road-going vehicles and businesses, and equally, people in their cars, buses and lorries. So where this all comes from the policy, the control of dust and emissions during construction and demolition supplementary planning guidance. This was published back in July 2014. 100 odd pages of reading, and includes a foreword by the then Mayor Boris Johnson. In it, the GLA, which is the Greater London Authority, highlights that much has been done to reduce emissions from road-going vehicles. So buses have gone hybrid, there's some electric, taxis, hybrid, electric, but now they're looking to control the emissions from construction equipment, of which you only have to look at the skyline in London and you can see huge amounts. For every tower crane you see on there, just imagine how much plant and equipment's underneath there. So NRMM, non-road mobile machinery. So defined as any mobile machine, item of transportable industrial equipment or vehicle that is with or without bodywork that is not intended for carrying passengers or goods on the road, and it's installed with a combustion engine, either in a internal spark ignition, so an SI engine, could be a petrol engine for spark ignition, or a compression engine, CI, for a diesel engine. So interestingly there, this also includes equipment such as excavators, bulldozers, cranes and MEWPs, but these are all dependent on how they use and how they contribute greatly to air pollution, and what they emit is obviously carbon oxide, hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides and particulate matters. So essentially the EU policy it's the objective to progressively reduce the emissions and to phase out all polluting equipment. I'll cover some more examples a little bit later, some that you might not actually realise as well. So engines then, in terms of the engines, they're split into various categories. So SI would be a petrol engine and a CI would be compression ignition for a diesel engine. But then they're further classified according to the engine's power rating. These categories are then given limits for their output, what emissions they come out, and they're commonly known as stages. So if we've got the regulations then tighten the permissible levels of emissions by introducing different dates of compliance for each category and stage, and then it also then goes in the rules then go into policy in terms of if the engine either constant or variable speed too. So some things to be mindful of. So pollution, I think we're all kind of aware of the dangers. I think it's sometimes we don't realise, in certain areas it's certainly worse than others. In Britain alone, pollution is linked to some 40,000 deaths per year. Now, pollution is pollution. That's every type of pollution. But nearly 9,500 people are thought to die each year in London due to long-term exposure to air pollution. And that's more than twice as many as previously thought. Nitrogen oxides, or NOx as sometimes referred to, are poisonous gases derived from nitrogen and oxygen, which has been combusted under high pressure and temperatures. So all combustion processes produce oxides of nitrogen. In London, road transport and heating systems are generally the main sources of NOx emissions. But NOx, as I said earlier, is primarily made up of two pollutants, nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide is the most concerned due to its impact on health. Most times nitrogen oxide converts into NO2 in air, so that kind of gets itself and dissipates away. So essentially the important part is to control the emissions, as it can have a direct and indirect effect on human health. Directly, it's known to cause breathing problems, headaches, chronic reduced lung function, eye irritation, loss of appetite, and even corroded teeth. Indirectly, it can affect humans by damaging our ecosystem, which we rely on, for example, water, on land by harming animals and plants. Particulate matter is also, particle pollution is also known as particulate matter, or PM. And that is a mixture of solids and liquid droplets which is floating in air. Now, some of these particles are released directly from a specific source, while others may form in a complicated chemical reaction in the atmosphere. Particulate matter may be then classified into the size of the particle. This would then identify how far it may travel into the gas exchange region of the lungs. I won't go any further into that as some biology for you in that sense, but I think we can all understand that different sizes of particles are going to go further into our into our nasal cavity, into our throat, into our lungs, and then into the gas exchange region, and that can some of them can have huge and lasting effects. Theoretically, perfect combustion, carbon dioxide, water and nitrogen are the end products. That's theory. In reality, however, the incomplete combustion of diesel fuels results in emissions that includes various oxides. There is also unburnt carbon particles as well as engine oils, debris, soot and ash particles, and these are known as particulate matter. One thing to note recently, the World Health, I think it was the World Health Organization, have have classified diesel exhaust emissions as being carcinogenic to humans, and this is based on evidence that exposure is associated with an increased risk of lung cancer. So just be mindful of that. And I've come across HSE inspectors getting a little bit excited about buildup of exhaust emissions in buildings and such when you've specified diesel machines for working inside a building. So let's look back a little bit of history. So going back well before I was born, 1952, worries about pollution reached a peak with the Great Smog of London. So some of you might remember it, the big smoke. This was a severe air pollution event that affected the British capital of London in December 1952. A really cold period of weather combined with an anticyclone and windless conditions essentially collected airborne pollutants. These were mostly from coal and various things like that, and this formed a thick layer of smog over the city. It lasted for 4 days and then dispersed quickly when the weather changed. The wind got up and it blew it away. It caused major disruption by reducing visibility, even penetrating indoor areas, and it was far more severe than previous smog events that had been experienced previously. Government medical reports in the following week, however, estimated up until the 8th of December, so that was some sort of 4 or 5 days. So 4,000 people had died as a direct result of the smog, and 100,000 more were made ill by the smog effects. And this effect was on the human's respiratory tract. But however, more recent research suggests that the total number of fatalities was much higher, and they believed it was around about 12,000 people. So, 4 years later, 1956, Parliament passed the Clean Air Act to tackle smoke and sulphur dioxide. The Act then required everyone to do their bit. Factories had to make their chimneys higher, householders had to burn smokeless fuels, and the government moved from some power stations out of the cities. So I do recall some of this from school. I guess that proves to my teacher I was listening at the time. But today many campaigners believe that we do need a modern Clean Air Act with a similar combination of carrot and stick to tackle particulates and nitrogen dioxide. Such an act would then clean up trains, taxis and buses. It would widen the network of emission zones and subsidise drivers to scrap older diesel vehicles in favour of electric and hybrid technology. So we can all be mindful of that. But pictures there, obviously got Piccadilly Circus and Tower Bridge, and yet if we look at today, all right, albeit it's still not as looking a hell of a lot more modern, but it's still looking a lot hazy, isn't it? So this picture, there's a couple of pictures here that managed to get off various sort of websites. Picture taken from the Shard over London, and a photo of London with Canary Wharf in the background. Now these photos have been taken in the last years and clearly show that we still have a problem. Obviously, given the density of inhabitants in London, as you can see, this is affecting a large number of Londoners. The Lancet Commission last week tweeted, "For decades, pollution and its harmful effects on the people's health, environment and the planet have been neglected by both the government and the international development agenda. And yet pollution is at its largest environmental cause of death and disease in the world today, responsible for an estimated 9 million premature deaths." So it says there, 1 in 6 deaths are actually linked to pollution these days. So quite harrowing figures. So the mayor then set up a web page which gives stakeholders the necessary information to decide on what equipment they bring onto site, how they can register it, what information on retrofitting technology, and more importantly, how they're going to police this going forward, and of course what penalties there are for breaching the rules. So just to give you a bit of a context of the area, as you can see there, we've got Outer London area, we've got the Central Activity Zone, and we've got the Inner London area. So the only thing that's not shown on that one, it would be Canary Wharf, which would be to the right of the Central Activity Zone. But it's just showing you a picture of that anyway. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a scope and context. So essentially now we're talking about anything in the white or the central dark and grey bit. But like anything, it's going to expand outwards. So what is required now? So from the 1st of December 2015, any major development site, and to quantify what a major and understand what constitutes a major development site. These are defined in the London Plan as residential developments of 10 dwellings or more, or where the number is not given, half a hectare or more, and for all other uses, a floor space of 1,000 square metres or a site area of 1 hectare or more. Now the site itself, the area itself, is directly involved with some aspect of that development, and floor space is defined as the sum of floor area with the building measures externally to the external wall faces at each level. So basements, car parks, rooftop plant rooms, the caretaker's flats, anything should be included in the floor space figure. So as you can see there, it says NRMM used on the site of any major development within the Greater London will be required to meet stage 3A of the EU directive. You can see there that any development site, similar sort of thing, any non-road mobile machine used on any site within a central activity zone or Canary Wharf will be required to meet stage 3B of the EU directive. So already we've got these requirements there, and you should be meeting these at this moment in time. What's in store for the future? So the goalposts are naturally going to change. And it would be remiss of me not to say that you will need to have your ducks in a row when 2020 arrives, as I'm sure they'll recognise that any honeymoon period that they've had is over. So from the 1st of September, any development site will then require to meet 3B, and any within the Greater London, and non-road mobile machine used on any site within a central activity zone or Canary Wharf will be required to meet stage 4 of the EU directive. So already they moved the goalpost one up, as you can see, and that's what's coming. But how do we know what's engines in our MEWPs or whatever plant you've got on site? It's remiss of me not to say that, if I'm truthful, I've been an IPAF trainer for 20 years plus probably now, and I don't think I've ever shown an operator where the engine serial plate is. We might have seen it, but I've never made any sort of notice of it. And to be thinking, would an operator really know that? Well, he should do, but I suspect at the end of the day, he's the person that may get asked, show me your engine plate by the inspector. So, before we go doing that, we need to make sure that manufacturers, and we need to be aware, should I say, that MEWP manufacturers do place these, serial plates in various positions. And there are dangers lurking, as I'm sure you'll be aware. So, you've got to be careful. This list is not exhaustive, but, clearly we've got to make sure that it's parked in a safe place, in accordance with the manufacturer's manual. The engine has been isolated, or any power sources have been isolated. I'm saying that because some machines have dual power, so you may have isolated one, but the other ones may still be going. So, and of course, making sure that it's properly cooled. Any parking brakes are engaged. Most MEWPs will tend to brake automatically. However, that's not always the case. It may be a truck-mounted MEWP or a van-mounted MEWP, so make sure they're engaged correctly. Any interlocks have been applied. Which are either safety or operational interlocks. All emergency stops have been pushed in, and any operating keys have been removed. And then, of course, you're going to have to wear the appropriate personal protective equipment. We would be expecting hand and eye protection as a minimum, but that is going to be, necessarily to speak to your safety teams and make sure you're following on-site procedures. So that's my legal thing out the way straight away. Make sure I cover myself there. Okay. So manufacturers naturally, so we've checked our engine over. We've parked our machine correctly. What do we do then? Manufacturers naturally have their own way of meeting the criteria. So many different types of engine: Kubota, Caterpillar, Deutsch, all different sort of engines that are out there. And if we just go back a step in sense of this, these engine serial numbers will be in their technical product information, and there's an example of one there, and it gives an indication of the engine code structure that you would see on the actual engine. Now, engines manufactured in compliance with EU engine emissions must be marked with certain information. These markings are commonly located on either an emissions label or an emissions plate. The emissions label can be in different places. It can be on the engine. You can actually find them. Sometimes they're in the cab of the vehicle, depending on the type of machine you've got. The engine should be marked by any durable method. So normally it's like a printed plate, but not necessarily. So just printed plate, riveted onto some part of the engine, and this is going to include the name of the engine manufacturer and the type approval number. You should familiarise yourself with the location of the engine plate on the MEWP, as this will make it then easier and quicker when requested to find it during an inspection. So you can see an example of a structure of an engine code there. So number 1, is it constant or is it variable speed? Number 2, what's the emission class? Number 3, EGR, so exhaust gas recirculation, so it's telling you if you've got some. It's also talking some of them sort of DPF or filters and such. Number 4, what's the application of that machine? Number 5, 6 and 7 is giving you some indication of the rated power in kilowatts, and number 8 is some type of extension. Okay, so you don't need to worry about all of these, but there are some things that are going to be very important to you shortly. So there is one key digit in the approval number that provide evidence of the emissions level to which the engine was manufactured, and this is generally the method by which the surveillance authorities will actually check the engine. And it's explicit evidence. It tells you when the engine was manufactured, and as I say, this is where they're going to actually, when they pull up, they ask you to open the engine canopy, they're then going to find that digit. There's then a second digit that can be used to identify excuse me, as an indication as to whether the engine is type approved for variable or constant speed operation. So this photo was taken from a JLG boom machine and shows the location of the power rating and the E1 number. So you can see that there. So E1 number straight in the middle, and you can see the power rating up on the top left. So that particular machine is 46 kilowatts with a horsepower of 62. From these numbers, we can see the engine has the power rating of 46, so we'll need to comply with the local LEZ. Okay, so the E1 number shows the engine's rate as a category 3A, so variable speed engine, and that complies with the GLA NRMM, except for the Central Activity Zone and Canary Wharf. So we'll be able to take this in the Greater London area, but we wouldn't be able to take this in the Central Activity Zone or Canary Wharf. The second digit is of importance because that constant speed engine regulations in the EU are currently limited to stage 3A. Stage 3B and stage 4 constant speed engines do not exist yet. So stage 3B and 4 constant speed engines do not yet exist. So this is technology that will be moving forward. Machines with engines which are below 37 kilowatts, which is 50 horsepower, will be exempt. Machines after 2008 will have an E1 engine seal plate, as we can see here, and this will state the category of the engine along with the engine's power rating. So in terms of the power rating, you can see there now, and if looking at all that, you're thinking, God, where am I going to look here? Importantly, if you look at that, the red sort of line at the very bottom there, you can see the letter J. Okay, so if we take what I'd mentioned earlier, then you can see there that it's between H and K. It's a stage 3A machine. Okay, so hopefully you've got that and you understand that. This picture shows another JLG machine, and I've done that to be consistent for you. The E1 number on the engine serial plates at the machine is 48.5 kilowatts, and it's a category 2 engine. So this would not comply with the GLA NRMM for the LEZ area. Okay, as you can see underneath that, I've given another example of a type approval number, and this is something that you might get in other operators and technical guidance. Whereas earlier with the Deutsch engine, giving you an example, here you can see there, and I haven't put the table in it, but you can see first letter L, second letter EU variable. That doesn't relate to what's on the screen there, because that's actually a G, but it still wouldn't be. So in this example, it's a variable speed 3B engine, complies with certain zones, but except will not comply with Central Activity Zone and Canary Wharf. So you can see it's a bit of a minefield. You've got to make sure what your engines are and what your codes are. Now, when you get onto the website that I showed you earlier, there's a common list of things that we have to that is preferred. And for example, the machinery manufacturer, the engine manufacturer, the engine details. It's limited, so it cannot be in the future, and should be the year of the engine manufacturer, not the year of the vehicle manufacturer, which can actually be different. Engines can be made well before the vehicle is made. So if you're unsure, then the engine plate would then provide you this. The engine power is recorded in kilowatts, and the plant ID is an entry for use by the site, so they can keep track of what machines have been entered onto the system. Generally speaking, it will be used by inspecting officers when they are checking the register against what is on site. So in our instance, from a MEWP rental company, it will be a unique fleet number. But it could be, if you had a wheeled excavator on site, it could be the license plate, on the back of the vehicle. The engine EU type approval number, as I mentioned earlier, is found on the engine plate, and as mentioned, it is the only real reliable definition of what stage the engine complies with. You must fill that in without any spaces, and the existing one should only that I've shown you there should only act as a guide. Occasionally, the engine number will have been incorrectly printed, or an engine may have not have one. So it could be, for example, an agricultural machine. The system will accept whatever you enter into the form, but entries that do not appear valid will be then flagged, and you are then going to have to give them further information. The EU emission engine stage is the key field for the data entry, and should normally be obtained from the engine plate or from the owner's documentation for the engine. There may be occasions when the EU type approval number again is not available, doesn't reflect the actual stage, and again you may find that you put an entry in that does not match it. Again, this will be flagged, and you're going to have to identify and provide further information. Just be mindful as well. Machines can be retrofitted, with various equipment. This will not change the engine emission stage. The engine emission stage will stay the same. So earlier I showed like the filters and such. You might fit them, but it doesn't change your emission stage. So there are some machines that are exempt, and in summary, this means, generally speaking, machines with engines that have a net power between 37 kilowatts and 560 kilowatts. These will be required to meet the standard. However, there are MEWPs with engines fitted with an engine which is lower than this, and therefore then will not be affected. So anything that's got 37 kilowatts or below, they're going to be exempt. You can see with modern buildings the way they're being designed, taller, therefore they're going to rely on larger equipment. So therefore some MEWPs will fall into the category above the 37 kilowatts. Now you can see there, any model of MEWP which currently has a stage 3A or 3B engine available. A MEWP which is in limited supply. There are some kit out there that you're not going to get them. There's no other piece of equipment out there in the industry that will do it. So that will be a limited type of machine. Or equally as well, a MEWP which is used intermittently, or for up to 30 days. So you might use it every now and again. And these are machines that are typically used for up to 30 days. So if you've got a machine on site for 10 days, that's a typical, 5 days could be a typical hire, and the machine's off hired. You may have a reason for exemption. What if your machine doesn't meet the standards? So there are a number of options available to comply with the NRMM policy. So you could reorganize your fleet. Yeah, okay. So and we've had to, we do this. Clearly we've been on this for a while. So only the equipment that's in London, would be then, meeting the requirements. You could replace equipment with new or second-hand equipment, which then will meet the policy. Retrofit, abatement technologies, put different types of retrofitting on the machines. You could re-engine. If you re-engine, you've got to be mindful of the type of engine that you re-engine with, or if not, like I said, you can apply for exemptions. So key messages are potentially that there is not currently sufficient quantity of compliant MEWPs in the UK to supply chain for this task. However, it meets the next best available EU stages. So that's a key message out there. Retrofit may be unviable. You may not be able to fit it with it. And when we think of retrofitting equipment, sometimes these machines were not designed to be retrofitted. And sometimes it may find that you actually get a higher engine emission standard because of this. The most common method of retrofitting involves the installation of a diesel particulate filter, or sometimes known as a DPF, or a catalytic converter to the exhaust system of the equipment. All diesel engines are potentially suitable for retrofit and this would mitigate particulate emissions, but space within the engine compartment and costs may be limiting factors. There may be also several main exhaust treatment technologies available to retrofit, and selection normally based on scale of reduction required and the available budget. So you've got to be mindful that there is issues there. The most effective method is wall flow filters as an abatement technology, and this almost completely removes any particulate matter from the exhaust. Partial flow filters are often cheaper, but they're significantly less effective, and sometimes they will fail to remove many of the smaller particles that cause the most damage to human health. And again, the diesel oxidation catalysts are primarily used to remove emissions in carbon monoxide and hydrocarbons in the exhaust. So you're not going to get what you thought with some of these, and you may have spent a considerable amount of money fitting them. The new introduction of the particulate number limits can only be met with the use of wall flow monolith type DPF filters, and the very low duty cycle, and this is important, low duty cycle of MEWPs, and what we mean in there is that they're not always working 100% of the time. Typically we find that MEWPs have between 25 to 30% of high use, and approximately 80% of it is at idling speed or switched off. So to regenerate the DPF, this would need more fuel, resulting in increased daily emissions. So essentially you're chucking more fuel into the machine to try and get the exhaust temperatures hot enough to get the filter to work. So it's kind of chicken and egg there. So also as well, some of the very low duty cycles and exhaust gases that we experience on the smaller MEWPs will not meet these requirements without having a bespoke situation and solution created. So just be mindful of that. So what actually IPAF did, International Powered Access Federation, the UK Country Council, recognised that we had an issue on this coming, and they engaged with UK members to draw up a viability exemption request for MEWPs to ensure that MEWPs are available for construction projects. Now this is available from the IPAF website. So as you can see, there's various things in there. So you're going to basically put in your machine type in there, the manufacturer, the engine manufacturer, the year it was made, plant ID, as I mentioned earlier, like a company hire names, unique fleet number, the engine EU type approval number, what the power is, if there's a retrofit available, the EU emission stage, and then the level exemptions already filled in there for your viability. You would basically put that together and send that out to NRMM to see if they would exempt the machine from use. Okay, to give you an idea as well, I mean, it is big in London. I've done quite a lot of research on this over the last sort of month and a half, and there's lots of. I would recommend that you have a look at this film. It doesn't take long. It's quite endearing, to be fair. Remember, this is for the future of not obviously not getting all green on you here, but the planet. But that's our children and the future years that we've got to be mindful of. So we've got to be mindful that there is issues in terms of making sure that. So it's a really little good short film, and I would recommend that you look at that. Okay, thanks for listening. I have got a couple of questions. Robert's asked, what other machines are affected? Right, and I did mention this earlier. Thanks, Robert, for reminding me on that. One of the when you look into the NRMM, there are a number of machines that are affected, and for example, generators can be affected, forklifts, which are industrial or rough terrain, even some pumps that are relying on a diesel engine. And one that surprised me was even garden equipment such as hedge trimmers or chainsaws. They will be affected. So kind of be mindful of that too. Okay, Chloe's just asked, will manufacturers, I have to read this off a very small screen in this program that's there. Will manufacturers be fitting stage 4 engines to new MEWPs? This, thanks Chloe, this was a question that was raised not too long ago, in fact, at one of the Strategic Forum Plant Safety groups, and there's a lot of contractors around the table, and equally there's a lot of manufacturers' representations in there, and it was, of course, one of the things that we're wanting to do is get the best engines in the machines, the more efficient engines, and obviously the less polluting engines. It was we were all told in the meeting that manufacturers will be using up their old stock of engines first. So essentially, you could have a 2017 built machine, but if there's an engine from 2014 sat on the shelf and it needs to be used, then that engine will be used. So just be kind of mindful of that. Okay, I don't think I've got any more questions. Hopefully you found that useful. As I say, this is going to come out to other parts of the UK without a doubt. Be sure to have a look on our website, as there are previous webinars which may be useful. And if we'd love to hear what you thought of the webinar. It's a short survey, and if you could send us your feedback, or equally email me, that'd be great. Okay, thank you very much. Have a great day. Take care. Bye bye.